This is Metro Week. Our top story, what's next in immigration policy? We'll ask a Southern Arizona congressman what he thinks about changing immigration policies. Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
I'm Andrea Kelly. Understanding immigration reform proposals, executive actions, and failed reform attempts requires explanation. First, we'll distinguish some terms in the discussion. Then, ask Congressman Raul Grijalva for his thoughts. President Barack Obama's executive action on immigration will allow up to 5 million people to temporarily receive reprieve from deportation and get work permits. That includes an estimated 135,000 people in Arizona. It would expand immigration waivers for high-skilled workers. It does not grant a permanent legal status or provide a path to citizenship. The president's action also expanded a program he created in 2012, known by its acronym DACA. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program allows some people who came to the United States as children and who do not have valid immigration documents to be temporarily shielded from deportation. People eligible for DACA are often referred to by another name, Dreamers. That's also an acronym derived from a proposal called the DREAM Act, which never passed Congress but would have provided permanent status for undocumented students who came to the country as children and have remained in good standing. Congressman Grijalva, I'd like to start by asking for your reaction to the president's executive action on immigration.
It's what many of us had been asking and pressuring for. It was brave, it was bold, it came in an urgent time. And I think by him making this action, that potentially is going to be 5+ million people that will qualify under his executive order. I think it's a necessary prod for Congress to really do something about it, not just to talk and say, you should have waited, Mr. President, like the Republican leadership said, so we could do something. Well, that wait has been perpetual. I've been there 12 years, and we've been waiting for 12 years. And sometimes it's been the Democrats' fault that haven't pushed the agenda hard enough. But in the last 6 years, it's been entirely in the hands of the House of Representatives, and nothing has moved. And I would suggest that this is a prod. Once the American people see what it really is and get away from the scare tactics and rhetoric that's been associated by against Obama, they'll see that it is a very narrow, legally defensible, constitutionally defensible executive order. And all of us people wanted him to go further. He couldn't. You have to defend this in court. There'll be a legal challenge, just like a legal challenge is happening now on Affordable Care Act. And I think what the president did was smart, very shrewd politically in a way, but also extremely brave, because this heat's going to come on. And there's other issues that we need to deal with in this coming session, immigration being a vitally important one, but the budget, issues of energy, and issues about how you shore up the Affordable Care Act.
You mentioned needing more action on immigration. What else would you like Congress to do?
I think Congress has to go back and deal with the issue of farm workers and the low-skilled workforce that is still being demanded by American employers for everything from farm work to cleaning, to doing that kind of work in this country. That is still a group of people that isn't day laborers, being another illustration. The LBGT community, the protection should be extended to that community. The parents of Dreamers, students that are protected under DACA but are not citizens and their parents aren't citizens, to extend that protection to those parents. There's a variety of things, the workforce issues that weren't done. And I would suggest that those are prime areas for this Congress to tackle. And if they have a comprehensive bill, do it. I mean, that's what we've been begging now for 18 months. 514 days since the Senate passed their bipartisan bill. It's been sitting in Speaker Boehner's desk, and it has not moved. If they were so urgent to do something, we could have brought that up to a vote. I think it would have passed. But if it didn't, then as the president said, then we start over and try to craft something that will. But now the ball has always been in the Republican leadership's hand in the House, and now also in the Senate. It's still there. And what the president did does not negate the need for a legislative fix. This is temporary protections. Legislative reform is a permanent protection.
You mentioned the comprehensive bill that the Senate passed, but that has not had a hearing in the House. Is that the best way to do this, or would piecemeal pieces of legislation be better?
I think people are open to almost anything right now. And if it's a programmatic, step-by-step, pragmatic, piecemeal approach to immigration reform, let's say beginning with ag jobs and that legislation, making the DREAM Act a permanent piece of legislation, I think people will be open to tackling those one at a time. But there has to be more than just discussion about it. There has to be some valid, verifiable piece of legislation that people can rally around or get in a position to talk and compromise about. We don't have that yet.
Is this doable with a Republican House, Republican Senate, and Democratic president?
I think it is for like I said, DACA had a huge impression, the Dreamers had on America itself and who they were and what outstanding young people they are and continue to be, and that it's been a success. I think you'll have the same effect with this deferred action for families, which is the primary core of what the president did. And America will see that this is not a threat, this is not something to fear, and I think public opinion will help us drive that. The other thing is the 2016 elections. If the Republicans want to cast themselves in the role of the obstructionist, I won't budge, I'm drawing this line in the sand, and I won't do anything about immigration, then it's their bane to carry, and their presidential candidate and their congressional candidates to carry into the 2016 elections. I think for political considerations, I think it's also an opportune time.
You have been co-chair of the Progressive Caucus. Is that a position you'll continue on in your next term?
Yes, I was elected by the members to be co-chair along with Keith Ellison, again, this is the second time he and I have done it together. I'm very excited about it. One of the primary functions I work on is promoting an alternative budget to the budget the Republicans come up, and sometimes the budget the Democrats come up. All along we felt during this last election that there wasn't a serious economic agenda that the Democrats were putting forward that talked about the loss of purchasing power among the middle class, the insecurity that Americans have with what the future for them and their children are going to be, that we didn't address that. The raising the minimum wage to $15 is absolutely necessary and appropriate, but you also are talking about the loss of 3% of purchasing power and wages. So wage inequality is a huge issue, wage disparity, a huge issue, and the insecurity of the American people. And we didn't address that very important issue of what's the economic agenda that America has to have. And I want to work on that as an alternative to what we've been talking about.
Are there divides within the Democratic Party on those issues?
Not as much as there used to be. I think there's the realization has come that we are not speaking the same language that the American people are speaking among Democrats. I think Democratic Party has always been on the side of the working folk. It's been on the side of the little guy, and it's been the voice to try to better conditions for the middle class and for the poor. We've got to get our voice back. And I think once we get our voice back into the economic agenda, and it's not just being in bitter gridlock, it's about speaking directly to them and get out of playing so much the inside game in Washington that's getting us nowhere, and play and play directly in a public arena where I think we have the advantage.
Is there a divide among Democrats on immigration?
Not as steep as it used to be. I think if there are people there are Democrats that don't agree with the president's decision and the executive order, it's a minuscule number, 5, 6, 7, and not a large number. The caucus is very solidly behind the president's decision and very solidly supporting him.
We mentioned your role in leadership in the Progressive Caucus. You've been elected or selected as ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee. What does that mean?
That means that I'm in charge of the Democrats on the Resources Committee. We're in the minority, so ranking member. I was elected by the caucus for that position. Great opportunity, something I've worked on those issues my whole public life, and now to have an opportunity to be not only the voice for those issues, and we're going to talk about energy policy. We're going to talk about EPA and clean water. We're going to talk about the public lands and wilderness, our waterways, all issues in which there's going to be real conflict because the agenda is to extract only and to undo the regulations and dismantle EPA. We're going to be that first line of defense for that legislation that has been so good to the American people, and we're looking forward to it. I got to put a team together of good staff that is going to, again, not play the inside game as much as we have played it in the past, but take it outside. And it's a tradition in the West. You know, this is the seat George Miller had. This is the seat Mo Udall had. This is the seat in that ranking position. I would prefer to be chairman, obviously, but in that ranking position, I think we can have great influence and be good advocates, and when necessary, push back in a very intelligent way.
You've mentioned a lot of issues that you hope get accomplished in the 2015 calendar year in Congress, but it's, Congress is lame duck session right now until January. The president is in his last 2 years of his term. Presumably the presidential election will be ramping up sooner than we all want it to. What can the voters, the taxpayers, actually expect Congress to do in the next calendar year?
Well, there was a message from the voters, and the message was, you guys have to get something done, some common sense things done. And I think there's common sense middle ground. We're not going to agree on everything, and nor should we. It's a democracy. But I think we're going to work really closely with the administration and get things that are important to Southern Arizona and to the region through administrative support and help. Legislatively, we're going to work with our colleagues to try to find middle ground. But at the end of the day, it's not just to be an automatic no on something, but to provide an alternative that people could compare. Because the fight is not just convincing each other in Congress, and that can be very ideological and it can be very difficult to do. But it also means convincing the American people that what you're presenting forward is common sense, rational, and begin to look at our opposition just not merely as knee-jerk no's, but as opposition with some intelligence and some quality behind it. I think we begin to do that, we've got to turn public opinion, because our fight's for public opinion. It's not for the votes that we can garner inside sometimes.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Join me next for Arizona Week. We'll analyze Arizona's role in a lawsuit against the president's plan for immigration reform.
This is being seen for what it is, which is a political action on the part of the president, rather than a genuine effort to achieve lasting, enduring immigration reform.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me this week are Sarah Garrett-Gasson of the Arizona Daily Star, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, and my colleague Christopher Conover of Arizona Public Media. Thank you all for coming in. Christopher, as we heard, Congressman Grijalva wants Congress to take some more steps to ease some of the legal immigration process or the legal status process for day laborers, temporary workers. How likely is it that Congress will take a vote on something like that?
No time soon. Congress did take some immigration steps this week. The House did. They passed a bill pretty much down party lines that tried to undo what the president just did with his executive actions. That was what they decided to do with immigration this week. Again, it passed pretty much down party lines. Senate leadership, which is still officially in the hands of the Democrats, they already said they're not taking it up. So it was purely symbolic. That's it. We're done with immigration for this year.
And was that an all-out disqualification of what the president did, or was it pieces of what, taking apart pieces of what
it basically would have, if it had become law, which of course would have required the president's signature, which is highly unlikely. It would have undone everything that he just did in that executive action. But again, it was purely symbolic. Representative Gosar from Arizona was the only Republican in our delegation who didn't vote for it. He merely voted present. And he said that was symbolic also because the bill was symbolic and he wanted to see something meaningful done. If they were going to dismantle what the president did, do something meaningful, not this symbolic gesture.
As we've seen many, many times in the Affordable Care Act. Sarah, and this week also several states are suing the federal government to try and do something similar. Arizona was not part of that lawsuit originally, then became part of it. First set up what that lawsuit is.
It is Texas and 16, now 17 other states, since Arizona jumped on the bandwagon, saying very similar to what the states did with the Affordable Care Act, saying, no, Mr. President, your executive action, in this case, the ACA, of course, is a law, but saying that Mr. Obama's executive action goes beyond the scope of his authority. And of course, the White House has been extremely careful with how they've structured this, what they've included, what they've not included. Is Congressman Grijalva explained, there are many things that the president and people who are supporting immigration reform would like to have seen included in that executive order that just weren't there because the White House decided that there wasn't the legal framework to support that. So I asked the Arizona Attorney General's office, why wasn't Arizona included in this lawsuit when the news came out of Texas taking the lead on it and the 16 other states jumping in line. And their response today was that they have joined, that has come out. And it was just a little bit late. Their press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, says, quote, "We weren't given the materials until the last minute and wanted to take time to analyze the lawsuit before signing on," which I think is entirely reasonable. But now Arizona is part of that big, now 18 state lawsuit.
How much is this going to cost us? Is this another one of those lawsuits that Arizona jumps aboard that costs hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for the taxpayers and doesn't serve a real legal point, but is just using the bully pulpit to rail against something?
Well, Texas is taking the lead, and it's being filed in Texas district court. So I'm not sure about the legal cost in that, and certainly those would be shared probably between the multitude of states. But you raise a good point about, is this kind of a fool's errand? So that's something that we will see going forward as it plays out in court.
And of course, we have to remember that as soon as the president released, actually it was before he released the executive action, Joe Arpaio filed a lawsuit in D.C. Circuit Court, and that was the last we ever heard of that. This one may, because of the states, have a little more legs to it, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays over time.
Christopher, we're going to talk about a lot of ongoing issues, I think, in this roundtable. One of them is the A-10, the main aircraft based at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And this ongoing, on again, off again, is it going to be funded next year? Is it not? Is it going to be retired? What's the latest in that saga?
The latest is the House and Senate Armed Services Committee came up with a deal for the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the language that goes with the defense budget that basically tells the Pentagon how to spend the money that is in the defense budget. In there is authorization to keep the A-10 in the air. Specifically, it says the Air Force cannot spend money to retire the A-10 in fiscal 15. We're currently in fiscal 15, that ends in October. So the A-10 essentially stays in the air through the end of this fiscal year. And as the new fiscal year dawns, we'll start this fight again. There's an interesting little caveat down in the bottom of the language, though, that says the Air Force, if it can justify, may take 36 A-10s and put them in a backup flying status. Every squadron of A-10s, there are 11 squadrons around the world, has a couple of planes that are in backup status. That way, if one of the planes has a mechanical problem, they just take the one out of backup and they can keep their readiness levels ready. So they would take 36 planes and put them in backup status. From what I understand and have learned out of the Pentagon, they don't know where these 36 planes will come from. That's the equivalent almost of 2 full squadrons, 2 of the 11 that are still in existence. So do they just dump 2 squadrons? Does every squadron give a couple of planes? How this is going to work is still a question. And there's no money for backup planes. The active planes all have their maintainers, their mechanics, their pilots. There's no money for that.
That's where the money savings come from.
That's
right?
exactly where the money savings comes from. It's not like they're going to take those 36 planes and park them and then take the people that maintain them and just say, come to work every day and stare at the airplanes as they're parked on the tarmac. So there's still a lot of questions about this. The Pentagon does have to justify the move before they do it, but it essentially is a way to close down almost 2 squadrons worth. And as Martha McSally said when we talked to her as a former A-10 squadron commander, the people that are assigned to those planes, they'll get new orders and be sent somewhere else. So it's going to be very hard to bring those planes back online if the Air Force gets the permission to back them down.
You mentioned Republican Martha McSally, who is currently the winner in Congressional District 2, pending a recount against incumbent Democrat Ron Barber. Dylan, we talk about this every week, but every week there's something else to say. So the recount is going on right now, and we've heard that we're not going to get any updates until it ends. Why is that?
I think they want to not have too many people picking nits about the process as we're going through. I mean, there will be party observers there, there'll be legal observers there. It's going to be very closely watched, but they're not going to put out the numbers that they're counting every day like they did right after the general election, because it really comes down to what's the total at the end. And we don't have as many questions right now about the process. We know how many votes were counted. We know how many provisional ballots were not counted. You know, we've got those numbers and know that already. Now it's a matter of seeing what the recount comes up with. And part of the recount hasn't started yet. Cochise County isn't going to start until next week. And it's going to be interesting to see how that gets handled, because they've had so much trouble with their ballot counting machines over the past couple of elections.
They couldn't count in the general, and they couldn't count in the primary. Graham County ended up doing that ballot counting. Sarah?
I just wanted to say I got a call yesterday from a reader who had read about the recount and was just up in arms about why are they only doing 5%? Why are they only doing 5%?
That's the hand count that's verifying the machines?
Right, and it's in state statute, and it's all, I mean, there's steps, and it's pretty easy to find in state statute. But I also, and maybe this is just this one reader, but I thought I would just mention it because it struck someone this way, so I thought I'd just bring it up. This isn't a case of they count 5% and whoever wins that wins the race. So it's more of a quality control measure verifying the count that has already happened.
Right, they are literally recounting every ballot cast in the district with machines, verifying it with the 5% hand count. And that's the same thing they actually did in the general election. There's a hand count to verify the machines, so we're really repeating the exact same process.
Right.
They pick a certain number of precincts randomly and hand count those and compare them to what the machines come up with in the recount and make sure that they are very, very, very close. It's only a handful of votes that could throw it off. And if that, you know, if enough precincts and enough batches of early ballots do not match with that count, then we would have to go and hand count every single one of those 220 some ballots, which would bring us well past the December 16th deadline. So there's a chance we might be talking about this for a very, very long time.
And you brought up December 16th. That's the date Pima County has said it expects to be finished counting ballots and then go back to the judge to get a final
That was
result.
the deadline set by the judge, was finish this up by 5 p.m. on December 16th. So we should know something by then as to who has actually been declared the winner, but then there's still the option of an election challenge.
Well, we'll ask you about it that week. You'll be back on the roundtable. Christopher.
Well, and the election challenge is a real possibility. I know I talked to both candidates this week. I'm sure most reporters who cover this have talked to both of them this week. And neither of them will say for certain that after the recount is finished, whether or not they will go to court, but they're both fundraising for it. I got an email this week from U.S. House Speaker John Boehner on behalf of the McSally campaign, asking for money for a recount fund, if you will. We've gotten similar from the Barber campaign, big names on behalf of the Barber campaign.
Gabby Giffords is one of them.
Gabby Giffords being one of them. But to be clear for people, the campaigns do not pay for the recount. We, the state, we taxpayers pay for the recount. What they're raising money for are the legal challenges. I won't say that are sure to come, but no one will be surprised if and when they do come.
They all say they're exploring their options.
Exactly.
And we should mention that the recount is not happening because it was requested by a candidate.
Right.
It's required by law that we go through this process.
And you mentioned taxpayer money. That's coming out of the Secretary of State's budget. So the state budget goes to all the departments. The Secretary of State is a department. And that's where we're paying for this recount. It's not coming from the campaigns. It's not coming from an extra tax or something like that in Pima County or Cochise County.
No, it's the cost of running an election. It's part of the cost of running an election that the state and those who, or whoever is running the election, in this case the state, is responsible for taking care of.
Sarah, I'm going to pivot to a new topic. That's the Mexican American Studies, or the culturally relevant courses that are being offered in Tucson Unified School District. Of course, those were dismantled after a state law was written that actually put them in violation of state law. The district decided to cancel those, but then a federal judge has ordered the district to hold culturally relevant courses with a Mexican American perspective. And this week we saw maybe some maneuvering in the district on that. Can you give us the background?
Yeah.
Or the update, I guess.
The update, yes. What has happened is there was a video that came out, posted on the internet, that I will not quote on public television, where it was basically at a conference. Augie Romero, who's the principal of Pueblo High School, and other educators within Tucson Unified School District, current and former. And the question was, are students in Tucson Unified getting these, what the education, the coursework, what was being taught with Mexican American Studies? And so Principal Romero kept saying, it's back, it's the work is back. I interpreted that to mean that teachers were teaching content that was culturally relevant, that the content was back, that it wasn't necessarily the same classes and taught in the same way, but that things from different perspectives were being taught in the classroom. What happened was the Arizona Department of Education saw that and said, oh, well, excuse us, you're not supposed to be doing that anymore, and sent a letter to the Tucson Unified School District saying, excuse us, we need to come and take a look.
So the district knew that the state was looking into this?
Well, the district knew that the state was looking into it. The district got upset because two people from the department showed up at Pueblo and sat in on some classes, and the superintendent said, you're supposed to give us a heads up if that was going to happen. Excuse me. So right now the district is saying, sure, we're cooperating, we're happy to show you whatever you need to know, but it's still in the works.
Okay. Any other updates on that from you guys? No.
She did
It's a
pretty
long saga.
well. It is a long saga.
It's not over yet.
And I would like to say, John Huppenthal, the secretary, or the superintendent of public instruction, is moving on, as is former superintendent Tom Horn, attorney general. And those two guys were kind of the architects behind this law, and they are both out of office come January. I don't think this issue is going to go away. It's too much of a red meat issue for the Republican Party, and it gets people kind of revved up politically, and it really is something that people talk a lot about. So I don't think it's something that will just fade off into the sunset with the two of them.
So you expect with new governor, new attorney general, new superintendent of public instruction that this will be an ongoing issue?
I think so.
Okay. Christopher, in another topic, the University of Arizona is holding meetings with some of the neighborhoods around campus in the coming weeks to talk about, interrelations between the university and the residents and the students. What prompted this?
What prompted this? The latest incident was some of the high-rise dorms that are right off campus that are not owned by the university but are made for university students. Students were throwing things off the balcony into the parking lot of the Islamic Center.
This is like 10 stories.
Yeah, 10 stories, yes. This isn't off the second story. Not that that's safer throwing it off the second story, but throwing it off 10 stories down into the parking lot of the Islamic Center that happens to be right there. Everything from bottles, big liquor bottles, I've heard pumpkins and things like that, some pretty heavy things that could injure somebody. City Councilman Steve Kozachek held some meetings about it. Some students were thrown out of those housing units as a result for safety issues. But the university decided to kind of expand it and look around the university as a whole and make sure that that relations between the community that lives near the university and the students that live within the community, things are still smooth. We've seen, not throwing things off 10-story balconies before, but the red tag issue in some neighborhoods where students living in houses were throwing big parties. Police come along and put a red tag on there. It's nothing new. The type of incident is new, but the friction between students and the community is the same.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for coming in. We'll be updating that story as we go. Also, you can find more on these and other stories, including from our sister station, NPR 89.1, on our website. Now, Arizona Week is delving even more into the effects of President Obama's immigration decisions.